Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Under the domestic and international laws of war, citizens are forbidden from taking part in war on the side of the aggressor and are legally bound to disobey the orders of the government that takes part in any illegal war or supports acts of genocide, crimes against humanity or war crimes. However, till today in the 21st century, genocides continue to take place. Joining us on this show is Chris Coverdale, a lawyer and tax resister. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Delighted.
Thank you. Would like to first ask you, why does the UK have to have an army?
There's no real purpose, but there is a very good reason. We've had it for years, and people just assume that because we've had it for years, we have to have it now. The need for an army disappeared in 1945, 1946.
Why does it still continue then?
Mainly because there's a lot of people's interests put at risk. And we have a system in this country where our processes go on and on and on every year, regardless of whether they're necessary or not. For instance, we have a budgeting system in Britain which, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer says, right, next year we're going to put 50 billion into defence and 90 billion into health and so on, because last year we put in 45 billion and 80 billion, whatever it is, so we need a bit more, and that's how we're going to do it. And therefore those government departments carry on, and the armed forces carry on. We don't need them at all. If we had a system in the country, rather like most families have, which says we can afford this year to paint the house or to send junior to a university or whatever it is, and we've put the money into that, and then we can't do the other things which we were doing last year. And so really, as a nation, what we really need is an annual budgeting system based on need, not a budgeting system based on habit.
Do you think it's a waste of money to have an army in the UK?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not only a waste of money, it's illegal. We agreed many years ago to disarm and to cooperate with every other nation in the world. And our armed forces have been fighting and killing innocent people for the last 15 years continuously, since 1998. November 1998, we started bombing Iraq in the so-called no-fly zone. And we've been killing people ever since, for no purpose at all. And it's only because our young people are brought into the army, tricked into getting there, and then told to go off and murder other people, and then, you're doing this for your country and everything else. It's absolute rubbish.
Since the recession took place in the UK, there are many adverts stating and encouraging a lot of youth to go into the army. What do you think about this?
I'm appalled by it, utterly appalled by it, because they are being trained to murder innocent people. It's very interesting, if you spend time on the streets of London. I've spent quite a lot of time in Parliament Square over the last 10 years, and I've met a lot of the ex-soldiers who've come back and been got rid of by the armed forces. And a lot of them have horrendous mental problems, because they know when they burst into a house in Afghanistan somewhere and killed people there, that sears them for life. And a lot of them commit suicide. So the suicide rate is higher than the death rate in action now. And that just appalls me. So asking anybody to join the armed forces is horrendous. So don't do it. If you're ever given the opportunity, don't do it. And persuade your friends not to do it.
How can the UK prevent the conflicts that are taking place?
We have to go back to a tax rebellion. There's two or three things. I think perhaps the bombing of Iraq vote on Friday is a good example. We had 500 and so I forget how many, so suddenly over 500 MPs voted to bomb Iraq. Now every one of those knows that it is a crime to drop bombs on people, to kill people. If it was the IRA doing it to us, we'd be up in arms and, you know, trying to get at the IRA, but we do it to other people for no purpose at all. So we must try to influence our MPs. Now we can do that next year. There's going to be a general election. I think it's very important to put into the record of every MP when it comes round to what they have achieved on our behalf next year, and they sort of say, I want you to re-elect me, just make sure you list the number of people they have been responsible for the deaths of by voting in favour of the wars in Libya, the war in the bombing of Iraq, the war with Iraq, the war with Afghanistan. The total at the moment is about 1.5 million people have died as a result of our military actions of Britain and America and the coalition forces since 2001, and about 35% of those are children. That's over 500,000 children have been murdered by our government, paid for by our taxpayers. I was working out the other day, if we buried those children in little coffins 1 metre long, and we put all those coffins end to end, it would stretch for 500 kilometres.
That's a lot.
That's the distance from here to Edinburgh, for instance. 500 kilometres, just for the kids we've killed. And if we had, say, 1 minute's silence, you know, we walked up that line of coffins and had 1 minute's silence for each child, and we did it for 8 hours a day, it would take us nearly 3 years to get to the end of the line. Now, it's that sort of horror, horrendous consequence that we are just overlooking every day that I personally want to stop. We have to stop it. This is not humanity at all. It is not what we as a nation have been brought up to do.
With the general elections taking place next year, if no one went out to vote, meaning everyone was against voting, because you know the majority of MPs actually want to go out to war and wouldn't actually stop the war, as we've seen, you know, happen in the past. What would actually happen? Well,
some people will go out to vote, and whoever, even if there's only 20 votes for an MP, they will get in if nobody else votes. So it's actually, voting is very important. But make sure you vote for somebody who has sworn on the Bible, if you like, or on the Quran to uphold the wishes of his constituents or her constituents. One of our problems is that we never hold them to account for what they said. And we must make sure that the system is different next year. As I say, first of all, make sure that everybody who is already in Parliament, they have their record behind them. Now, there's only 40 of them or so who voted against the bombing. So at least 550 of them committed the most serious crimes known to law. The idea of them getting back into power is horrendous. So we must make sure they don't. Now, the best way of making sure they don't is to stop the money. If the government hasn't got any money to fight the wars, then they will have to stop. And we can start to hold them to account individually for what they've done in court. And I'd like to see every one of those 550 MPs who voted yesterday for the bombing of Iraq to be faced in court, facing a jury, and to be prosecuted and tried for what they did. And if after that they are found not guilty, fine, then re-elect them to Parliament. But it'd be a very strange jury that would find them not guilty when all the facts are out there in the public domain for everybody to see. And the problem is that nobody in power in this country is ever held to account for what they've done. We've got to do it in court, not in the polling booths, because that's a very inefficient way. Because politicians, they promise anything they like and will change their mind as soon as they get into power. And there's nothing we can do about it for the next 5 years. But there is something we can do about it, and that is get them into court and charge them with crimes.
It'll be amazing if we can. Do you agree with females going into the army?
No, nobody should go into the army. Why do you want to go into the army and kill other people?
They mainly say it's actually to support the country. That's the reason they put.
And it never is. We as a country don't want to be killing Afghans and Iraqis. It's only a small group at the top who put across the propaganda, this is for your nation, this is for your country, you die for your country. If they had to go out and they were in the front line, having made the decisions, we would never go to war. They wouldn't dare. They really wouldn't. I mean, it's just horrendous how they can sit back and send people off to war and then say, right, now come on, let's go for a drink and have a good meal tonight and so on. None of them. I remember watching, hearing about Mrs. Thatcher when she attacked the Falkland Islands and sank the Belgrano, killing 369 people. That was the worst war crime at that time in British history. And the papers sort of said, well done, you know, tremendous. Gotcha, I think was the phrase at the time. And I then heard about what went on in the submarine that did the sinking. When they fired there was dead silence in the submarine. They fired 2 torpedoes. And when they heard the torpedoes hit, they stood and cheered for 2 minutes in the submarine, and nobody could stop them. They just, you know. And it's that sort of appalling behaviour which becomes the norm in an army. So asking anyone to join the armed forces is quite the most appalling thing we can ever do.
But the problem that mainly happens is our politicians would keep saying that, you know, we're needed in countries like Iraq, for example. The UK is needed to remove the threat that's going to be coming to Britain. And there came, a few weeks back, there was this whole thing on social media how, you know, after David Cameron spoke about the threat that ISIS is to Britain, okay, that there's going to be attacks on the underground. Why do you think politicians actually use that type of technique?
They've been using it for 100 years. It's false flag stuff. He knows perfectly well that if there is an attack on the underground, it will be organised by Mossad and the MI6 with the help of the Metropolitan Police. These people are all in the thing together, the people at the top particularly. And no terrorists are going to blow up underground trains. That's all been organised by the British government, and together with Mossad and the Americans. Same with 9/11. It's a false flag operation that is done in order to encourage the population to say, we must go and kill these people because they have done this to us.
Why are they so interested in the Islamic countries?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think mainly it's the oil. It just happens that most of the world's oil is in the Middle East, or the access to the oil through Afghanistan, the Russian oil, Tajikistan and all that sort of area. So I think it's something to do with oil, but I'm not certain. I don't know.
Because, you know, like after the attacks that took place, there became this whole, you know, stereotype of the Muslim that even if someone's to walk down the street with a hijab on or the cultural dress that the Islamic person would wear, they're just kind of like attacked, or they're more, people tend to be afraid of them than anything else, yes. Which is a problem that most of us tend to face. So how can we actually remove this, do you think?
I think we have to get rid of our governments. I mean, we just have to. This country basically is very good. The people of this country are human beings, and we're run by a group of psychopaths, and we've got to get rid of the psychopaths and sociopaths that run the country and stoke up the problems. We can get back to peace very quickly if we get rid of the people who are pushing for war.
How can we become peaceful then?
Well, I think that's the key thing, is to say we've got a strategy. We've got to get warmongers, war criminals into court to answer for their crimes, and those need to be the MPs, military commanders, lawyers, and judges who are organising this. And if we get half a dozen of the top ones in each of those branches into court and convicted of crimes, then the whole situation will change, and we can get some decent people into Parliament. And we just need to change then the systems so that we become more like Switzerland. I want to make sure that we are a proper democracy, not an oligarchy as we are now.
But the problem we face is the media always would kind of like shape how the British government would want us to look at the situation. You know, with the whole threat situation, everyone was then saying, yeah, we should actually go into Iraq and remove these people, remove ISIS, whereas they're called in Arabic Daesh, like remove them, get them, killed. So it kind of became in a way that the society as a whole, the majority became with the idea of the UK going into Iraq. What more can we do? What can we do with that situation?
It gets back down to the media, and as I say, I personally think that the whole situation will change if we get a few of our leaders in a long and complex criminal case. All the facts will have to come out on both sides, and when all the facts come out, they will be convicted, and that will change the whole situation straight away, because as soon as a leader knows that they are likely to be convicted and imprisoned for 30 years, then they will stop waging war. And we have to take legal action rather than protests, demonstrations and petitions and marches and so on, which are totally useless. We must start getting people into court. We must use the law to ensure that the law is there for us. And the law is quite clear. International law is quite clear. Domestic law is quite clear. So let me just read out that one paragraph.
Please do.
This is the principle concerning the duty not to intervene in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. And the law is, no state or group of states has the right to intervene, directly or indirectly, for any reason whatever, in the internal or external affairs of any other state. Consequently, armed intervention and all other forms of interference or attempted threats against the personality of the state or against its political, economic and cultural elements are in violation of international law. Now that's clear as a bell, and that was agreed by the United Nations in 1970 as the main principle under which nations would cooperate together. And it's Britain, America, Israel, and a few others, NATO states mainly, who break it all the time. And so we've got to make sure that when our government says this has been authorised by the United Nations Security Council, that is a lie. It is a deception, a gross deception. The Security Council cannot authorise the use of armed force, ever. And yet our government says, oh, it's all authorised under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. That's rubbish, utter rubbish. It is a lie, it is a deception. And we need to make sure that those lawyers who are pursuing this in the interests of the Zionists and others are held to account in court for it. Unfortunately, some of our leading legal establishments are teaching this every day, this crap law, the untrue law, and they never mention things like this United Nations Declaration on Principles of International Law, which are
so they're kind of
fundamental.
like justifying everything in a way.
Yeah, they justify war. There's what they call international humanitarian law. Now, that is a construct of warmongers who are trying to justify war. International humanitarian law, that's got nothing to do with the United Nations and the laws of war, which we agreed with the United Nations. And laws against war, we should call them, really.
Because they're using everything, like you showed me a few seconds ago, and it wasn't everything the government is doing is against what's actually been written, or let's say agreed, apparently by the government. So
by the world, it's very important to understand that the United Nations was set up in 1945 for the peoples of the world to make sure war never happened again. It had happened twice, and we said we cannot allow it to happen again. We must make these agreements between every nation of the world. Now, most nations uphold it. There are at least 130 members of the United Nations who never go to war.
Why don't they say anything about it then? Why don't they say, you countries, for example, the UK, Israel, US, you're actually going against the law, so we can actually hold you accountable for what you're actually doing?
I don't know is the answer to that. I think Britain particularly is responsible for managing the propaganda at the United Nations. One of the problems about Britain is that many of the central language that's used in these things is English. And it's very difficult for people of different nationalities when an Englishman gets up and says, this is the law, and in a plummy voice says, we've been authorized under the United Nations Charter and Article 42 to attack Iraq, then people believe it. And we've got to get right back to a real understanding of what the law actually says. It's not what the lawyers say, it's what the law says that's so important. And never believe a British lawyer. I haven't found a single lawyer in this country I can trust, I have to say that. And I've been looking for lawyers in this country for more than 40 years who I can trust, and I've never found one yet. They all know that it's a crime to kill somebody else, but they support it every day.
That is a big problem.
It's a massive problem. We have a criminal injustice system rather than a criminal justice system in this country.
But you mentioned a few times that we have to take them to court. It's harder than it sounds.
I know. I've been trying I've had more than 350 attempts to get our leaders into court to answer for their crimes. And because the Metropolitan Police is corrupt at the top and the Crown Prosecution Service is corrupt at the top, and because the judges are corrupt, the system doesn't work. And people say, oh, the only people who get prosecuted are the first-line soldiers. And a few of those have been prosecuted, but no person up the...
But it shouldn't actually be the soldiers, because the soldiers are doing what they've been commanded by, the people on the top. So the people on the top should be prosecuted for what's actually taking place, not the soldiers.
Absolutely. And that's what I've been trying to say for a long time. So when our soldiers are prosecuted by our government, I keep saying, look, it's the people, I've tried to put it in and said it's the people who give the orders who ought to be prosecuted, not the soldier.
Of course.
And we have to prosecute David Cameron for ordering us to bomb Iraq. That was totally illegal, what he was saying in Parliament. And he needs to be prosecuted for it. And if he is, then we can stop war. But we've got to find some way of getting our legal system to work, our justice system to work. Now, it might be possible to get some of them into the International Criminal Court in The Hague, but that is pretty corrupt as well. They tend to just prosecute African leaders at the moment. But we might be able to do it, and I'd love to see 10 of our leaders, perhaps 20 of our leaders lined up in that court, rather like at the trial at Nuremberg, we need 20 British leaders facing the International Criminal Court and charged with crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes.
With the article you showed our viewers, do you think that actually came into existence due to the World War I and World War II? And because, yes, there are wars taking place currently today, but they're not World War III. They're just a few countries interfering with another.
It came into existence because this is the United Nations process. It's pretty slow, but in 1962, I think it was Guatemala, was concerned and put forward a motion for a lot of the smaller nations were concerned that the bigger nations like America and others, Britain in particular, were breaking the law all the time. They understood, our understanding of this is we're never going to threaten or use force. That's what we've agreed. So why isn't America and Britain and the other big ones pursuing the law? So what happened was the United Nations General Assembly agreed to ask the International Law Commission to come out with a new statement of what the law means. And it took them 8 years of consultation. And in 1970, they issued the Declaration on Principles of International Law. Now that is the most important legal document that's ever been produced in this world. That is what the United Nations and the International Law Commission think about the relations between states, and in particular in the use of force. And it's clearly out there. Unfortunately, it's quite, dense. But the statements, when you read them, are clear as a bell. And so what we've got to do is to get copies of this circulated to every classroom in the country, to every public official, to every MP. And if, for instance, next year our MPs are standing again for Parliament, we can get people in every constituency to say, right, this is what the law we've all agreed to uphold is. Why haven't you upheld it on our behalf? You voted for the attack on Libya. You voted for the attack on Iraq. Why are you interfering in other nations' affairs? We've agreed we never would. So we've got to be much more tough at holding our leaders to account for the crimes, both in the polling booths and prior to the election and in court. And I'd like to see each one, as I say, all those 550 MPs who voted for bombing Iraq held to account in court.
Do you think it would be a good idea to print one of these out and then send it to the Parliament, members of Parliament, so they can actually have a look at the law and remind them of why they should actually be members of Parliament?
Perfect. It's exactly the sort of thing that needs to be done. And it's not difficult. If you look at United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2625, that is the Declaration on Principles of International Law. And you can get published, I've copied that in a booklet form, but it actually comes across as, you can get it on the website of the United Nations. And I think it would be a brilliant idea to get one in front of every MP and their constituents to say, look, why aren't you upholding it? It says it is a crime. There are statements in here which are extremely useful. A war of aggression constitutes a crime against the peace for which there is responsibility under international law. Now that is individual responsibility. So what we've agreed is that anyone who commits who enters into a war of aggression commits a crime and is responsible. So therefore, why aren't we holding them to account in court? These are the questions we need to ask our leaders, our MPs. So I think it's a very good idea, and anything your programme can do to encourage people to read it, understand it, and get it promulgated across the country. particularly to public officials who are in charge of waging war, who take the decisions to wage war. Military commanders, none of them know this.
Because I'm thinking, because there are many organisations against war, like Stop the War, and there's the Free Al-Aqsa, the ones for Palestine. They can use this as a tool, let's say, to stop the wars taking place, and of course, stop Israel from bombing and killing the Palestinians, like we saw taking place in the summer. So if they were to use this, article, they'll be able to hopefully get their voices heard, as well as, of course, protesting, because protesting does make awareness in a way, but as you said, we haven't seen much difference.
I think the important thing is to make people aware of the law. What they're making people aware of is the fact that I don't like what's going on.
Yeah.
And there are a million people out there saying, do not do it. But that awareness may be good for the million people, but it has no effect on the system. So what we have to do is to make people aware of the law we've signed up to, and the fact that our leaders are breaking that law, and that we have a system for holding them to account. And if we can do those three things and hold them to account, then we will stop war. So yes, go for it, but make sure that we have the whole system operating, and once people know the law, then we need to make sure it is enforced. And we can do that again if we all say, go on tax diversion, withhold taxes until these things happen. And we say we're not going to pay for any more of this until our leaders are held to account for what's happened, the wars have stopped, the troops have come home, and our government is upholding the law to a T, every single bit of it.
That's something everyone would actually wish for, because no one would be wanting to pay for a war, but knowing the situation and the circumstances that would take place for not paying the taxes, for example, and for not supporting not paying your VAT also, would cause a great problem in a way, because not everyone would have the time, for example, to go to court. They'll just be like, I'll just pay off my taxes and then,
But as you said in the first place, if we do this for a month, they're not going to catch up with us for years sometimes. It's not as if you're going to get shoved into prison next week. There's a whole court process that has to be gone through. And what is most important is we get this issue into court. Now, what happened to me was that I've been refusing to pay council tax, and they took me to court about it, and they asked me to come to court to show cause why I should not pay council tax, legal cause. So I said, I'd like to show legal cause, and here's my case, and then they dismissed it because they couldn't handle it, and it went. I appealed it, and it went up every level of the court, right up to the Court of Appeal, and every time the courts are saying, well, no, we can't deal with this, it's frivolous and totally without merit. Now, it isn't frivolous and totally without merit, but that's all they can say to make sure that it never gets into court. So we just have to ensure that these issues get into court, and judges and juries are faced with prosecuting not us, but the people who are committing the real crimes.
We would hope that happens, but the problem is, you said, they're not actually taking the case to court to begin with. They're just like dismissing it and giving it to the next person and the next person.
That's why we need numbers. We've got to have
We
more.
need numbers, and not just numbers. Like being in London and knowing the life, just, you have to be just running your whole time. You don't have the time in a way to stop and try and do this, even though it's very important. And I'm with the whole idea of, I'm against paying my taxes in the sense that the money's going to be going to war, and knowing that the money I'm paying is going to be killing someone, that hurts even more. But the whole thing of stopping and writing an appeal and everything else, that takes a lot of time. And the thing is, not everybody knows the exact law to go about the appeal, which is another problem.
And that's why we need an organisation. I have lots of letters. You can just read it and sign it. A little form about refusing VAT, for instance. Once you've read it once, it's quite clear, and all you have to do is hand a copy and sign it, and that's all there is to it. And it's much easier than people think. A letter to the council, a letter to the Revenue and Customs. We can download those, but the most important thing is there must be people amongst your viewers who can set up what I would call a taxpayer's trust, so that they can do this on your behalf. If a few of us get together, and I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to do this, we can set it up on behalf of anybody else who says, look, it's too complicated for me. I'll send the money to you and you do it on my behalf. Now that's a way of ensuring that we can all get involved in to make it easy to withhold tax. And we can do that. And I think there are an awful lot of students and others out there who realise they need to know that if they repay their loans, student loans, that's a criminal offence.
In what way?
It's under Section 15 of the Terrorism Act 2000. A person commits an offence if he provides money or other property and knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will or may be used for the purposes of terrorism.
But how do we know the problem that we may face as students is, how do we know that the money we're going to be paying back is going to go for terrorist acts?
Basically, you know that the British government is financing activities in both Iraq and Afghanistan right now.
Yes.
That money all comes out of one pot, which is the money that is collected in tax from the people of Britain. And it comes in 350 different routes. And one of the routes is the university fees and the loans that people take out. Repaying those loans. So what you need to do is to make sure that you understand Section 15 of the Terrorism Act 2000. And if you read and understand it...
Sorry, if one of us gets a letter from the student loan or student finance, we'll just say that we don't want to pay back because of that.
I'm working with a Luton University at the moment, and the idea is to just give a little letter which goes to the dean or whatever it is and saying, I have discovered that it is a criminal offence if I pay money to the government for the purposes of terrorism. Now that I know that our government is bombing Iraq, now that the Supreme Court has said this is terrorism, I understand that it is my duty in law not to pay this money. Would you please correct me on this and explain to me how I've got it wrong? If the dean can say, well, no, you've misread that section of the law, then you say, well, I'll pay it then. But meantime, it is my understanding that it's a crime, and I don't want to commit a crime, so I'm withholding the money until you clear with me that my understanding of the law is wrong. If it's right, then we are both committing an offence.
But the problem we have with the student loans is they have access to our accounts, whatever we want to do. So we can't actually stop the bank, for example, from taking the money out because that would cause a problem. What can we do with that situation?
Well, you can. There are ways of doing this. And as I say, the important thing is to write the letter which says, it's my understanding that it's a crime to do it. Would you please clarify for me the meaning of this law? Now that the Supreme Court has said it's a crime to support terrorism, I understand that is a crime. We've got to go on the offensive. At the moment, we just follow the systems which we are obediently have been doing for the last 250 years. You pay your tax, and the assumption is that the tax is always used lawfully. We now know it isn't. Our government has been deceiving us for years, and it is a criminal offence to pay tax. And we have to show that in court. Now, bit by bit, we've got to get this into court. It doesn't take long. And even when you're in court, and the judge says, no, you're wrong, that is not the interpretation, you then say, okay, all right, I'll pay it. But up till now, I believe fervently that I had the right, correct interpretation of it. and therefore I've done nothing wrong. I have been trying to uphold the law. So at any stage down the line, you can say that. And therefore the risk goes right down. It's not risky as everybody thinks. We've been taught that it is risky not to pay tax. That is why we've been held under the thumb of our governments for so long. The important thing to remember is that we are a democracy, and democracies operate with the consent of the people. And I do not consent to having my money used to murder kids. And I will say I do not consent to that, and you have no right to force me to pay money to murder kids. And as we get more and more people saying this, we can take back the power which we've let go. We've let our government take power over every aspect of our lives, and we are far too obedient. We now need to be obedient to the law. I describe this as a civil obedience campaign, not a civil disobedience campaign, because I am wanting our leaders, everybody in this country, to obey the law. That's all.
Yeah, because that is actually obeying the law. Hopefully our viewers would actually start writing up their letters to the student loan and, tell them that we're not going to be paying this certain amount because it's all going to terrorist acts. And thank you very much for joining us on the show. And thank you very much for watching Beneath the Surface. See you next time.